I don't know much about the Philippines yet. That's probably not going to be my next project. But there was an article says church says clergywoman faces trumped up charges. And I asked the author to be friends on Facebook, and she hasn't accepted me yet. But I got questions about this
Yeah.
because it's real interesting. The pastor's name is Glofi Baluntong, and Filipinos forgive me for mispronouncing that, but that seems to be her. Her ministry is with indigenous population here. I can't recall the name of the group off the top of my head, but the accusation that, well, it's the allegation, accusation. The argument that this article makes is that she is not at all a threat to the state, but that the state has red tagged her, accusing her of the charge of murder. Um, yeah, the campaign of red tagging designed to silence her and other activists who support the rights of indigenous people and poor throughout the country. Now, I want to know more about this. The particulars of the charge are not stated in
Yeah, that's
this.
what I found missing too. Like,
You just had a series of statements from other clergy people, especially taking. So it's kind of this intersectional justice type thing where it's concerned with indigenous people. That's an oppressed group. She's a woman. That's an oppressed group. And then to some degree, non-Catholic Methodist or Christian groups in the Philippines are. It doesn't really talk about that in here, but the story is kind of being. There's this hegemonic authoritarian power, which is the state, and then there's the United Methodist Church that's facing off against it. And the last thing I recall reading about the Filipino context was several years ago. The primary leader of their government was going after drug dealers, just summarily killing them, pretty much. And the United Methodist clergy were trying to protect them, and they were advocating for the rights of these drug dealers, not to be summarily killed. Now, with this, I was able to reach out to one Filipino clergy and just said, why is the government threatened by clergy advocating for indigenous people? Why is that so threatening that they would trump up false charges? So before I do any more analysis, did you look at this? Did you have any responses to anything in this?
You know, I know very little about the Philippine context. I mean, the closest I have is I had a professor in my doctorate of ministry, Luther O'Connor, who's from the Philippines, and I always thought it was interesting that he had an Irish last name, and then I learned that my last name in one of the Filipino languages is a word for good food. So
Nice.
it's
Okay.
spelled the same. It's like even though it's an Irish name, so like, you know, he's the Filipino with the Irish name, and I'm the Irishman with the Filipino name. You know?
Yeah.
But I really don't know much about the context there. I mean, I know a little bit about the Philippines and the politics there, and you know, they've had, even though it's been a quote unquote democracy, it's been more of a you know, they've had, you know, dictatorship like governments and corruption in the past. I mean, and so yeah, I mean, I'd like to know the nature of these charges. I mean, is she directly involved, or is she being charged with murder because a group that she might have been associated with was involved in terrorist acts that killed someone? I mean, you know.
Well, so as I started asking, so usually, even if they're trumped up charges, usually there's some kernel of truth in a lie.
Yeah.
You know, so not that the kernel of truth would be that she is a murderer, but is she tied to any groups that are accused of like guerrilla military tactics? So I looked up this U.S. Department of State report, the 2021 report on international religious freedom, and it's particular to the Philippines. I did not read this whole thing. However, I read parts of it. Glofi, the pastor mentioned in this previous article, is mentioned here. But there are crackdowns on all kinds of religious groups here. And if the reasons were listed, I didn't get to it. So I need to read more. But so in any context, there are global forces at work, there are spiritual forces at work, and then there are local forces at work. And we can't really speak to the local. You and I don't know the local. But we do have a history to draw on of authoritarian regimes and how they behave. Is there an authoritarian government in place there that doesn't like any competing authorities? It seems to be the case. I mean, they're not just targeting Methodists. They're targeting Muslims as well.
Yeah.
And then I looked up, I remembered that Mark Tooley wrote this article on the World Council of Churches and their official connection to the KGB. There's the World Council of Churches and the National Council of Churches, and both were founded in the earlier half of the 20th century, that were largely undergirded and supported by the mainline denominations.
They were both founded under the social gospel.
Rauschenbusch was the original social gospel. He was a Baptist.
Of the original liberalism, not modern liberalism, but the original.
So there's a question of how far removed they are.
Yeah.
So the IRD was started when it became known. He makes reference to it at the beginning of this article, that Marxist guerrilla groups were funded by the WCC, the World Council of Churches. Now, I tried to find an article that substantiates that, and I didn't find one. What I did find was this article on the NCC talking about their communist foundation and leanings. It begins with a quote from Rushdoony: "The beginning of true liberty is Jesus Christ, and therefore the first and last target of all subversion is biblical faith. Hence, it is that the church has been the first target of infiltration and subversion, and it is the most subverted institution in the United States today." So at the start of the 20th century, you have this global Marxist movement that was very serious, very well organized, and global in nature, as I already said, that was able to effectively infiltrate a number of institutions and effectively work for their overthrow. And even whenever the overt proletariat versus bourgeois framework fell apart in the West, they came up with new ways in which to pit people groups against one another.
Yeah.
So I can't help but wonder if there is strong Marxism within the Filipino context, or if these indigenous groups have any way become enthralled to this, because she's overtly a social justice warrior. These things overlap in the West. How much do they do in other contexts? Yeah. You can't have any of these assumptions going into it. So what I want to do as I read that starting article is I want to be on her side. I hate authoritarian government. I really do. But also, whenever I realize that this flag she's waving is a social justice, a left-leaning one, what I wonder is, we've seen it already in dozens of contexts across the world, are we seeing authoritarianism versus Marxism? And in that case, I don't care to support either side in this.
I mean, and I need more information, because, some basic tenets of the Christian faith can be found within communism, Marxism. They take a little bit of the truth, if you will, and build
that we need to care for all people equally.
Yeah,
all people are equally made in God's image.
A strong, powerful political lie around it.
Sure.
But so is she truly a Marxist, or is she just standing up for those commonalities?
Yeah, right. Yeah,
those commonalities between a Marxist and the gospel.
In which case, Reverend Balintong, I'm going to make a commitment to be in prayer for you. I sure hope that you really are just caring for the indigenous people and not at all guilty of what you're being charged of. But let's see, what was the name of this author? Gladys Mengiduyos. Would you please do a follow-up article? We're very interested to know more details about this. We want to know how to pray for this woman of God.